So we are going to start and proceed with the agenda. We have the excuse of Dr. Fenton Bede from FAO, and Dr. Hafiz Muminjanov will take care of his part. So please, Hafiz.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Thank you very much, Emilio. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear member of CA community. So I'm pleased and honored to welcome you all at the third webinar in the series of webinars we organized together with ECAP on preparation to the 8th World Congress on Conservation Agriculture. Today we had over 270 registered participants for this webinar, and we all appreciate very much your time and interest to our webinars. As you have been following the previous webinars, we invited the experts with vast knowledge and expertise on different subjects and themes strongly linked with conservation agriculture. So on our first webinar, we had Professor Gottlieb Bausch, the president of European Conservation Agriculture Federation, who presented the main theme of the 8th World Congress on Conservation Agriculture on profitable and sustainable farming with conservation agriculture. And Gottlieb clearly described the future of farming. Our second speaker was Professor Amir Kassam, who presented the successful experiences and learnings from CA globally. Today we have another colleague and friend, Professor Don Reicosky. I'm sure most of you know him. You are familiar with his publications, with his research papers and books. Professor Don Reicosky is coming from the USDA North Central Soil Conservation Research Laboratory and the University of Minnesota, in St. Paul, USA. He is a well-known soil scientist with vast research and development work on soil and water conservation, particularly on carbon cycling, carbon management, and tillage impacts. His research findings demonstrate that carbon loss is directly proportional to the volume of soil disturbed during the land preparation, soil preparation, farming activities, and approved the role of conservation agriculture to minimize the carbon losses in agriculture systems. Therefore, today, Don will present the farm and ecosystem level benefits of conservation agriculture to the farmers, society, and environment. Before giving the floor to Professor Reicosky, once again, I thank you all and will be looking forward to seeing at the upcoming webinars planned on 19th November with Tom Goddard and on 3rd of December with Dr. Rashid Mrabet. Please follow up on the webinar invitations. Thank you and wish all of us a very successful webinar. Thank you. Please, Don, floor is yours.
Okay, if Julio will put me on slide presentation.
You can share your screen, Dom.
Okay, so, okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And Hafiz already took my opening expression. I would say good morning to those in Americas, good afternoon to you in Europe and Africa, and good evening to everyone elsewhere in the, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So I'd like to thank ECAP and FAO for this opportunity to talk about conservation agriculture. I'd like to thank Gottlieb and Emilio for their efforts, and especially Julio for his help in teaching me about Zoom. So I'd also like to thank Hafiz for his introduction, and especially FAO for their continued support in promoting conservation agriculture. So I am truly honored to talk about CA and ecosystem services as related to the living soil and carbon management. I think you know most of my attitude towards carbon is very important to me. And so we must understand that the conservation agriculture systems can play a major role in providing the ecosystem services that we need. Okay, there we go. So we all start off by understanding that nature is connected to everything and connected to everyone. Nature is communicating with us. The question is,
I'm sorry, Don, but you are still not sharing your screen with us.
I'm not sure what I need to.
Do you have a share screen button on the bottom?
No, I do not have. All I have is a little picture of you up in the upper right-hand corner.
Well, in that case, you should go up. If you are the host already, you have the green button to share, the button to share with us on the top, not on the bottom.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. Take your time.
Okay, well, I have nothing at the bottom of the screen other than my slides.
Have you shared the presentation with any of us? No? Do you have it?
What about on the top of the screen?
I have nothing at the top of the screen.
If you scroll up, it might appear. If you scroll up to the end of the screen.
Okay, I have one little box on the right-hand side that's got a down arrow, a microphone, a camera.
No. It has to do with share screen.
Okay, well, I thought I touched that.
On the same line as camera.
Maximize zoom. Maximize zoom.
I have no commands other than my PowerPoint that is on my screen.
Okay,
But you have to go back to the Zoom application.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm in Zoom.
Yeah.
Do I share my screen now?
Yeah, that's it. Please. And then you select. Now it's
Okay.
going.
Now we are on.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Okay, so okay, sorry about that.
No
Julio,
problem.
Have to train me the next time. So, okay, well, if I could pick up where I left off, and now my screen shows the bottom half is covered up, Julio. Okay, well, we will struggle with that because the lower part of my screen is blocked with the taskbar. So, okay, so nature is providing our resources that are very important to us. We have the sun, the soil, the water, the air. I'd like to include human intellect and biodiversity into that system. So nature provides us this biopower in the living soil. And we need to understand how to utilize that biopower. And from my perspective, the living soil starts our food chain. We must understand the living soil if we want to live in harmony with Mother Nature. So it's important that we try to understand how nature provides us power to us. And an excellent example is of nature's biological power is illustrated in this tiny microscopic piece of biology called COVID-19. It's been powerful enough to bring our world to its knees. This little piece of biology is about 1 micron in diameter, which is about 1/100th of the diameter of a human hair. But it's so small, but it's so powerful. And so we need to understand that power. The COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of the relationship between humans and nature, and the profound consequences to our well-being and survival that can result in continued biodiversity loss and degradation of our agricultural ecosystems. Around the globe, COVID-19 has the upper hand. So the question is, how can we learn from nature's biopower? What can we learn from this pandemic event? Nature has already demonstrated her destructive biological power, and now we must learn about nature's constructive biological power. Understanding nature's biological power and applying that knowledge to maintain and enhance ecosystem services for all creatures on Earth is no easy task. There is hope in the application of conservation agriculture system and principles in our food producing ecosystems. So this power of biology is important to us, and we have to figure out how to optimize it in our conservation agriculture system. So I would like to talk about some simplified definitions so that we are all coming from the same perspective. I realize that these are simplifications, and I hope you understand that they're much more complex than that in our everyday activities. So we can define ecology as that branch of biology that deals with the relationships of living organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. These are the biology, the living part of the soil that we are talking about. We can define an ecosystem as a community of living organisms interacting with each other and their non-living environment. Again, the living soil is an ecosystem in itself because it's a community of many different types of creatures in that. We can then define ecosystem services are the many and the varied benefits to humans provided by the natural resources and the environment in the form of healthy ecosystems. Ecosystem services can be considered nature's contribution to humanity. While these are fairly simplified definitions, I'm sure you understand that the systems we're working with are much more complicated than that. And so I use this example here of the complexity of ecosystems. Ecosystems are characterized by the interactive geological, hydrological, climatological, ecological, and anthropogenic processes. Strong interactions between these processes and the components requires a systems approach to understand the response to these dynamic changes. And so when you put all of those together, I think you get a sense of the complexity of what's going on in some of these processes in our ecosystem services. And so I introduced this quote from Rattan Lau, who states that soil organic matter generates and regulates every ecosystem services that sustains life on Earth. If that doesn't convince you that carbon's pretty important in our everyday activities, I hope you will learn that from today's presentation. So this is my way of introducing the importance of carbon in our ecosystem services processes. I use this statement from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, where they state that soil biodiversity and organic carbon are vital to the way ecosystems function, and they largely determine the role of land in producing food, storing water, mitigating climate change. They are the key to unlocking the multiple economic and environmental benefits, that is the multifunctionality of our land. So I want you to pick up again another group that's promoting soil organic carbon along with soil biodiversity. That's very important in maintaining and enhancing our ecosystem services. So if we take a look at this stairway to understanding the ecosystem services, the first step in that stairway is the microbial community in the soil. The next step is the living soil attributes and how this community interacts. And then the third step up is nature providing these primary resources. We move up to the next step in terms of ecology, ecosystems, and ultimately up to the ecosystem services. And I want you to understand that this stairway to ecosystem services depends on a foundation of soil carbon. And so there's these individual dynamic services that are being provided that result in visible outcomes to us in terms of what we see happening on the landscape. Understand the importance of the microbiology and carbon in that particular system. Some of our colleagues have identified 4 groups of ecosystem services. They are the provisioning, supporting, regulating, and cultural services. And I put them around conservation agriculture and carbon cycling because of the association and the need for all of those factors in understanding these ecosystem services. These 4 groups, if we expand them to look at them in a little bit more detail, we can see the direct implications of conservation agriculture on at least the provisioning, the supporting, and the regulating. I am not a social scientist, I'm a soil scientist, and I can see how CA would affect the cultural services indirectly. But I am certain that if we did not have CA and the provisioning, supporting, and regulating services, we would not have the cultural services to go with it. So indirectly, conservation agriculture contributes to all 4 of these different groups of ecosystem services that we talk about. It's fairly complex, and I don't have the time to go into the detail, but if you get the sense that there are these 4 groups that will help us get through this and show the importance, my emphasis is on showing the importance of conservation agriculture systems in that. But reducing that to utilizing the resources, helping provide these ecosystem services, the 4 categories of services, the provisioning, the supporting, the regulating, and the cultural, support humanity. These ecosystems support all life on Earth, and we must understand how to manipulate them and manage them for improvement and enhanced efficiency in all of our operations. Recently, there was an article in the New York Times asking the question, can the world's farms be key to biodiversity? They talked about extensive ecosystem restoration as central to the conservation of biodiversity and stabilizing the climate. And they suggested that returning a strategic 15% of the world's farmland to nature could spare about 60% of the plant and animal extinctions that have been taking place currently. That decision could also sequester about 30% of the carbon built up in the atmosphere since the start of the industrial age. They also go on to mention the importance of nature-based solutions to climate, to food, to water security, and sustainable livelihoods. This requires biodiversity remain in the foundation for a sustainable future. And so I want to emphasize that again, to these nature-based solutions require biodiversity that remains in the foundation for a sustainable future. And so my bias in the simple sentence is conservation agriculture is nature's way of doing things. It's as close as we can get to mimicking nature with the current agricultural practices that we're using in our everyday activities. So in working with Mother Nature and trying to figure out how to improve soil health, I use this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. He states that as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but the principles are few. The man who grasps the principles can successfully select his own method. And this is why I think conservation agriculture is important. The first principle is we need to have is continuous minimum soil disturbance, continuous maximum vegetative cover, and continuous maintenance of biodiversity in the system. And with these 3 principles, I think that CA is nature's way of doing things. And so from my perspective, conservation agriculture systems is a carbon-centered agriculture. It provides us with healthy food, affordable, it's profitable, environmentally friendly, and a regenerative solution to our food security. So this carbon-centered concept, I think, is pretty important. And so understanding nature's biopower is a key to understanding conservation agriculture. And as we try to make the point is that nature has provided us with this biopower and we must learn to understand it and utilize it so that we can maintain food security. And so the way I look at this carbon-centered agriculture is in this particular diagram, where we have the three principles: minimum soil disturbance, permanent vegetative cover, and species diversification, along with some site-specific adaptation of technology and complementary and agricultural practices. I want you to understand that they are integrated around carbon cycling in the center of this schematic diagram. So we need to have synchronization and biodiversity that results in synergistic benefits and harmony with Mother Nature. The core principles of CA are universal, but the solutions are local and revolve around carbon cycling using a systems approach. Site-specific requirements and complementary agriculture require some flexibility in the management options, but also provide opportunities for innovation. We must understand the smooth integration of these three principles around a carbon-centered synchrony and biodiversity that enables the synergistic benefits and harmony of CA system in our agricultural landscapes. It shows some of the complexity, but it also shows the need for interaction and integration that's important to us in maintaining our agricultural production systems. Now, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but it's also an important one. And again, we want to make the point that conservation agriculture systems serves as a foundation for these ecosystem services. And I've listed 5 as examples here that are important to us, that just from selected from amongst perhaps 30 different types of ecosystem services: carbon cycling, habitat provisioning, water cycling and storage, food production, primary productivity, nutrient cycling and storage, and we could go on. So we understand that the conservation systems provides the foundation, but the lower part of that foundation is soil carbon that involves the living roots and root exudates and the living soil that's recycling and decomposing some of this organic matter. And it's the power of this living soil that we need to understand if we're going to make progress in making our systems more effective and efficient in terms of ecosystem services. So I use this quote from Klaus Topper from some time ago, who stated that ecosystems and the services they provide are financially significant, and to degrade and damage them is tantamount to economic suicide. I'd like to continue that and say further ecosystem damage and degradation is tantamount to genocide of humanity. We must maintain and protect these ecosystems because that's where we live, that's our home, and that's where we grow our food. And it's very important that we utilize the best methods possible, and I think that conservation agriculture is coming close to that. So if we take a look at what's degrading some of our ecosystems, our agricultural ecosystems, one of my biases is that intensive tillage. Moldboard plow tillage is the master of disaster. It sets up the soil for erosion and degradation, causes the carbon loss, causes water loss, increases the pollution, and results in other degradation that's very important to us in terms of maintaining environmental quality. Well, the volume of carbon dioxide that's emitted as a result of that tillage operation is proportional to the volume of soil that's disturbed. And if you look at the equipment that's required, and understand that diesel fuel required to pull the tractor and then do the tillage is also proportional to the volume of soil disturbed. So intensive tillage becomes a double negative with respect to agriculture's carbon footprint. We have the CO2 loss from the organic matter decomposition from the soil, and we have the CO2 going back to the atmosphere from the consumption of the diesel fuel, a double negative with respect to agriculture's carbon footprint. And we must find some way to get away from that attitude and move more towards minimum soil disturbance. Well, the aspect that's not often understood is that intensive tillage affects the biology. Intensive tillage opens up the all-you-can-eat buffet for the birds and the microbes. And a farmer from Denmark provided me with a picture on the top, and you can see that the seagulls are concentrated in the most recent pass of the tillage tool going across the field. And you can understand that they are eating up sliced up worms, insects, and white grubs that are brought to the surface as a result of the tillage operation. So you can understand that the tillage is doing something to that large aspects of the soil biology, but you cannot understand what's happening to the microbes and the fungi because you need a microscope to find them. Well, in Minnesota, we have the same problem with the seagulls following the tillage implements, picking up the grubs. And what is always of interest to me is in our part of the world, within 20 to 30 minutes after the tractor comes into the field and makes a pass or two, the seagulls show up and feast on the soil fauna that are brought to the surface. And I still don't understand how those seagulls can find that field and take advantage of those insects and that are brought to the soil surface. But the point I want to make is that intensive tillage does a lot of damage to the soil biology. And this results in this accelerated soil degradation because it's a major disturbance. But intensive tillage also accelerates soil erosion in terms of water, wind, and tillage erosion. That's significantly and important to us. And so it's this biological damage that we have to understand because we are now understanding the benefits and the power those biology critters have that are important to us. And so this tillage is a abiotic operation with a biotic disturbance. And I use this phrase, the turmoil of tillage. The soil is a natural living system that has a lot of life, and when it's tilled intensively, is dramatically changed. It can be considered analogous to a human reaction to a combination of an earthquake, an asteroid impact, forest fire, a tsunami, a hurricane, and a tornado all rolled into one perturbation event. And if that happened to you 2 or 3 times a year in your home, you would not be very happy. You would not be very efficient in carrying your operations, and you would look for a more peaceful place where you carry out your life's activities. Some of this we can see in terms of what happens to the larger soil fauna that we can see visibly, but most of it is invisible. We cannot see what's happened to the microbes that require a microscope. Well, this intensive tillage also has unbalanced nature in terms of the tillage. And I think conservation agriculture is a major part of the solution. Not only do we have the CO2 loss from tillage-induced CO2 loss and emissions, we have the fossil fuel that's burning is contributing to the CO2 in the atmosphere and the greenhouse effect. And so we have too much carbon in the air in the forms of CO2 that results in some climate change and climate extremes, and typically a slight temperature increase. On the other end of the balance, we have too little carbon in the soil because of what we've done with intensive tillage over the last 300 or 400 years of agriculture. And that carbon has gone up and it in the atmosphere, contributing to the greenhouse effect. So we must try to find some way to get carbon into the soil. So conservation agriculture, I think, is important in terms of decarbonizing the air, capturing it in photosynthesis and plants, and then funneling it into the soil so that we can recarbonize the soil and bring nature back in balance so that we do not have these climate extremes. And so from my perspective, conservation agriculture is a major part of the solution to bring this back into balance and so that we do not have the climate extremes. Our challenges with the environmentalists is that fossil carbon that's put into the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels, we need to convert that fossil carbon to a bionic form of carbon and put it into our soils to feed the soil biology and support all of our ecosystem services. So there's a little bit of a carbon conundrum. I think that we need to have carbon in our agricultural systems, and we need to find some way to capture that carbon from the burning of fossil fuels and get it into the soil so we can enhance our ecosystem services. So another aspect of the ecosystem services are as emphasized on this slide, and I want to try to convince you that plant carbon is our greatest water management tool. Carbon is composed of many different components. It can be live or dead plant leaves, stems, roots, biomass, residue, mulch layers, particulate organic matter. It can be manure, humus, humic acids, and it can be exudates. And carbon is important to us because in our watersheds, carbon increases infiltration. It increases evapotranspiration. It increases soil structure and increases available water holding capacity, the water use efficiency. It increases water storage. It increases rooting depth, increases soil biological activity, increases water quality, enhances root and worm biopore formation, aeration, nutrient cycling and drainage, and so on. All of these benefits of carbon are important to us because they increase our control of what's happening in terms of hydrologic processes. Carbon also is helpful in decreasing some of the negatives, like it decreases soil runoff, it decreases erosion, decreases evaporation, sediments, some temperature mitigation, it decreases crusting and pollution, compaction, and desertification. And so all of these things are affected indirectly or directly through carbon management. And so I want to make the point that good carbon management is required for maximum water use efficiency. So if we are increasing it, we want to climb this stairway to enhanced water use efficiency. And I use this slide from my colleague, Jerry Hatfield, who talks about invisible and dynamic processes in the soil. And again, the first step in this stairway to water use efficiency is the soil microorganism, soil fauna. The next step is the carbon capture and cycling in the process of photosynthesis that leads to improved nutrient cycling, improved soil structure, improved infiltration and water storage, and ultimately increased water use efficiency. So these invisible and dynamic processes in the soil enable the visible outcomes that we see on the surface of the land in terms of changes in water use efficiency as it affects the hydrologic processes. Carbon is a major player in the management of our hydrologic processes in our watersheds. Another way to look at that water use efficiency is to compare a conventional ag system, conventional tillage ag system with the yellow symbols versus a conservation agriculture system with the blue symbols. The length of the arrow reflects the qualitative magnitude of that particular hydrologic process. So if we look at evaporation, the yellow arrow is larger than the blue arrow. So we have more evaporation from the conventional tillage system. That water is lost to the atmosphere with no additional benefit to the rest of the production system. And now if we look at transpiration, the blue arrow is the largest, and with conservation agriculture system, we have more water going through the soil and the plant system that provides benefits in producing our food. So similarly with conservation agriculture, we have more infiltration, we have less runoff, we have more biopores, we have more water storage, and we have more plant available water through the sponge effect with the organic matter acting as a sponge to hold more water available to the plants during drought periods. And so when we look at the hydrologic processes that are important to us in an agricultural watershed, it's obvious that conservation agriculture is going to have a much higher water use efficiency than the conventional tillage agriculture system. And we need to understand that so we can optimize these processes on our agricultural watersheds. So we've talked a little bit about carbon and going through conservation agriculture systems, leading to these ecosystem services and ecosystem functions. And I use this analogy of a wagon wheel because a wagon wheel represents unity, it represents strength, and it represents progress. The axle of that wagon wheel is carbon and carbon cycling. The hub of that wheel is the conservation agriculture systems. And emanating from that hub are these individual spokes that represent a benefit or an ecosystem service that's important to us. So at the top of the wheel, I have food, feed, fiber, and fuel because I need 3 meals a day. This is just one of the many services that comes out of conservation agriculture systems. We get some aspects of climate regulation, we get aspects of nutrient cycling, we get organism habitat, we get some flood mitigation, we manage the biodiversity, we clean up the water, we contribute to pollinator habitat, we contribute to carbon capture and carbon storage, and increased water use efficiency, as I previously discussed. I understand that this is a very cluttered slide, but the point I want to make that there's many, many ecosystem services that I cannot put on this one slide to make it clear that the role of carbon and conservation agriculture systems is very important to us. The point that I want to make is that conservation agriculture systems are driven by the carbon cycle that yields many ecosystem services so critical to our food security and our quality of life. We all have some responsibility in educating the general population about the importance of food production using CA systems. And we all have some responsibility that we must share because we are running out of time in terms of maintaining the quality of life that's important to all of us. So I earlier said something about conservation agriculture as nature's way. Nature enables us to do less and maybe get more out of the system, provided we understand the concept of biodiversity and the synergistic benefits of coming out of utilizing that biodiversity and the other 3 principles that are important to us. So we have less input in terms of minimum soil disturbance in the CA system. We have less fuel consumption, less fertilizer, herbicide, and pesticide use. We can get by with smaller tractors. We can have lower maintenance costs and lower labor costs. And if we look at these and we end up with more output, we can get more soil organic matter in the soil. We can get greater rooting depth. We can get better infiltration and soil aggregation and water use efficiency, as we just explained. We also have the potential for getting increased yields by enhanced nutrient cycling. And last but not least, all of these ecosystem services that are so important to us and our fellow creatures on the soil that we must understand and try to optimize for our quality of life. So we understand that our soils contain these living biological partners that are enabling this carbon and nutrient cycling synergies that are critical to agricultural ecosystem services. I think it's important that we start to understand the power, the biological power of these living partners and utilize that power to help maintain food security and prevent any further environmental degradation. So from my perspective, soil degradation is caused by one word, tillage. Soil recovery and regeneration is accomplished by one word, carbon. Soil health maintenance is accomplished by one word, carbon. And so I hope you understand that, at least with these 2 examples, we have some impact on our ecosystem services, and conservation agriculture is the best way to go. So I conclude with my cartoon character, Carby Carbon. He asks you to keep your carbon footprint small and manage carbon for ecosystem services. Conservation agriculture is a blueprint of regenerative agriculture that provides for our food security and ecosystem services. And so with that, if we have time, I'll be happy to respond to questions and look forward to any interesting discussion and debate that might go on.
Thank you very much, Don, for this interesting presentation. Thanks to you also to Carby Carbon for keeping in good shape and keep telling us and reminding us the most important things about conservation agriculture and ecosystem services. So now the floor is to the participants. Please, as I mentioned before, use the question and answer slot, which is next to the chat box. And we already have some questions done. I would say that we have some interest on conservation agriculture in rain-fed and where there is no irrigation, and between the time of harvest and planting where there is no rain. I would say we have addressed that several times, but what's your opinion about CA in irrigated land?
CA and irrigated it's sometimes a little more different because with irrigation, you can predict when you need to have the water applied, and if it's available, then it's easier. Well, when you're working in a non-irrigated system, you just go what Mother Nature provides. And so what I think is important in terms of irrigation, we have to optimize the efficiency of that very valuable water. And so we must be able to determine when the plants need it to minimize the stress and apply the water in a very efficient way and make sure that most of that water goes through the plants so that it contributes to the production of the grain that we need. The irrigation is very important, but also we have to understand with limited water, we have to be very efficient in utilizing that.
Okay.
It minimizes some of the risk for us.
And Shan Chuan she's interested in the biodiversity and use of pesticides. So how can we address that? I mean, you have in your presentation addressed that with the conservation agriculture we use less pesticides, we have a better biodiversity, but how can we teach and demonstrate that to our?
Well, well, that's an interesting question. You're looking at a old soil physicist trained in soil physics that over the last 50 years has become to understand the importance of soil biology. And if I would come back in a second life, I would come back as a soil ecologist because of the importance of this biology. But what I think I would like to make the point that if we do it as Mother Nature does it, then we will have a chance of success and minimize the amount of pesticides that we need. We have one CA farmer in North Dakota of the US, his name's Gabe Brown, and he's been doing no-till for about 30 years and then cover crops for about 20 years with that. And he has found with this combination of no-till and cover crops, and he also has cattle grazing, that he has completely eliminated his pesticides because he was able to select the cover crops that had specific characteristics to control and manipulate the soil biology a little bit. He is still using a very small amount of Roundup, but he has goals of being able to get by his cover crop management by using no more Roundup for weed control. And so he's looking at biological controls through the cover crop management rather than chemical pesticides that are designed to kill biology. We want to nurture biology and learn how to manage that so we can get the positive impacts rather than some of the negative impacts.
Mm-hmm. And we have a question by Ramanjit Singh about the extension of conservation agriculture, that we have papers, scientific papers telling the benefits, but how can we extend the concept to farmers more successfully?
Well, it's very interesting that question come. We have a small group, and Amir Kassam and I are actually writing a paper for a book chapter for Rattan Lau on that very subject. And I think that there's things that we have to clarify about what we know about conservation agriculture. Right now, we have this discussion between conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture. And I think we need to make very clear what we are doing in conservation agriculture. I think we need to make it very clear that we want to maintain a science foundation in all of our management decisions, and that we must make it clear to the public and to the policy people that there are a lot of details in working with this complex system. We have to be able to explain to the consumer that conservation is very important in producing our food, because we have to protect and preserve those resources for future generations. And now we have people talking about regenerative agriculture with 10 different principles that it glosses over some of the necessary detail. And so if we start thinking like a biology or like a critter in the soil, we will find better ways to manage that system so that we can minimize the use of the chemicals that have been so important to us. They are required in some situations, but I hope that we can transition away from maximizing their use to utilizing more biological management practices that will become closer to working with Mother Nature to provide the harmony that we need.
Thank you, Don. We also have a question about the participatory extension approach. I would ask maybe Hafiz and Joseph, because this is addressing also FAO. Why is there not a stronger effort by the FAO and other institutions to combine the participatory extension approach with CA promotion? I think, Hafiz, you have mentioned in previous webinars the new initiative you have. Maybe you can comment on that.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Actually, FAO is supporting the initiatives of countries, member countries, to promote CA. No, we can't do it by ourselves. So we welcome participatory approach also in training extension specialists. We had a project in Central Asia. We trained a lot of extension specialists who can further train the farmers. You know, one of the key topic on that project was CA. Emilio, you provided excellent support. So we hope we will replicate these activities. I know in Ukraine also, in the framework of the JEF project, there's training extension specialists. So this is in our agenda, and we are working on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hafiz.
Could I add something, Emilio?
Please, Don.
One of the things that I think is very important and observed in my travels is that farmer-led networking and farmer-led mentoring is very important to this expansion and promotion of conservation agriculture. Farmers listening to other farmers will listen to the farmers because they have credibility. Farmers listening to bureaucrats like myself, yes, they will listen and say, yes, that's good, but I will listen to the farmer and do what he says rather than what the scientist says. And so I see several farm leaders, at least here in the US, Argentina and Brazil are excellent examples. Australia has a group of farmers that are leading this, and the farmers have more credibility, not only with the politicians, not only with the consumers, but in other farmers where it's important to get that message out. And so I agree with everything that Hafiz said, but add the farmer-led component is very important.
Thank you.
I should also maybe add that particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa, FAO has a very strong farmer field school network, and farmer field schools are more or less exactly, they came up for observing diseases on crops. I mean, IPMs type of farmer field schools, but we have also done learning exercises about why we want to adhere to the principles of conservation agriculture and what does it mean for the farmer and in the field. And I think maybe an institutionalized system of a farmer field school is our colleagues in the NGO scene, like the African Conservation Tillage Network and other networks. And my specialty, which is sustainable mechanization, we need this link to the agronomic questions when it comes to equipment, because so many farmers, but also mainly the politicians, they like the bigger machines. Huh? We like the details when it comes to implements. We need to look at the details. What does it do? And for an implement to not disturb the soil, it needs quite specific requirements and specifications, and it needs a supplier, and it needs people who buy it. And that kind of an evolving of knowledge base to make people farmers before he makes a decision what he wants to spend his money on. He needs to know why he should not buy the tillage-based equipment and go for other equipment for the no-tillage and direct seeding equipment.
The ACT in Africa has done a tremendous job at working with the small landholders, and they are more significant than other ones because they have better control of a smaller amount of land. And then our large farmers, they are very efficient in producing it. But so far with the big equipment we've had, have been able to degrade the ecosystem faster than it can recover. And when you have personal contact with the land, there is more emphasis on the conservation and protection of it because you understand the importance of that piece of land providing you with food for future generations. Mm-hmm. The importance of conservation cannot be overemphasized. As we need to emphasize conservation and protection of the resources because they are finite. And we just cannot continue to go on and expand and let the population go because of the finite nature of the resources.
Okay, we'll go on because we have a lot of questions to answer. We'll try to address most of them, but those remaining we will try to do it afterwards. So, Don, what do you think about the soil nutrient stratification in CA? Do you think it's positive or negative from a plant uptake point of view? So the nutrient stratification, and also another similar question is, can you explain the potential to improve nitrogen use efficiency by understanding the carbon cycling better?
Okay, there's two questions. Let me address the first one in terms of nutrient cycling. I think that the nutrients in the recycled biomass are the ones that we just must utilize and use them over and over again. When we haul the yield off, the grain off of the land, we are removing some nutrients. And to keep nature in balance, we maybe have to add some of them, whether it comes from manure, whether it comes from fertilizer bag, that would be an individual's an opportunity. But trying to maintain plant growth as long as biologically possible, capturing carbon, that carbon goes into the soil along with the root exudates, enhances this nutrient cycling that's important for it. So that we have to have this balance between the carbon and the nitrogen, which leads me into the next question. And we have to understand how to balance that carbon to nitrogen ratio. And so we know that when we have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio in the biomass, like wheat straw, that it takes a little time to decompose that. And in the case of soybean, we have a very narrow CN ratio, and that material recycles very quickly, releasing the nutrients. And so our challenge is to reach a balance in maintaining the nutrients available by controlling the plant residue, plant biomass with the different variety, that is the diversity in those species. So we optimize all of those 22 nutrients that are required for plant growth. And we also have to understand some of the micronutrients. And it is my hope that we, promoting conservation agriculture, are going to put some emphasis on maintaining and enhancing food quality by trying to get the maximum nutrient density out of the products that we produce so that we can look at as a healthy food rather than a mass-produced food. And so there's aspects of managing these crops and the nutrient cycling that I think is important to us in terms of in producing healthy food that can have some medical benefit. We still have some work to do, but I think there's a real opportunity by managing the organic matter that relates to the nutrient cycling that can help us do that.
Mhm. So we have a couple of issues. One is what's your opinion on the potential of tree crops and livestock in conservation agriculture?
Okay, I have not had any experience with tree crops and then the companion cropping, but if I look at the principles of Mother Nature, those trees there can be capturing carbon more than likely many days out of the year, and so they are providing some shading. They're also taking some water out, and the challenge is in terms of balancing so that all of the species within that ecosystem mix are operating at the optimum. And that's where the human intellect comes in to make the management decisions on how to participate or separate the resources and dole out the resources so that all plants functioning in that ecosystem are operating at the optimum conditions. That's very, very challenging. It's very, very difficult to do. And so we have a lot of learning to be able to perfect that. But if we try to mimic nature as best we can, I think we'll make more progress working with the biology than working with the other aspects of agriculture that we've learned over the last 10,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And Don, we have several questions asking about the weed management, the use of chemicals, even addressing the issue of glyphosate in conservation agriculture. You have explained a bit on that, but can you please deepen on what's the role of the principles of conservation agriculture in controlling weeds, and what's your opinion on the use of or non-use of chemicals? Please.
Okay, well, many years ago, I was a proponent of Roundup for weed control because it is one of the most benign chemicals that we've had. But there's things coming out now that indicates that there may be some other hazards with the herbicides that we're not aware of at the time. And I'd like to think about us working with nature, trying to stimulate nature rather than trying to kill something that's a competition for our crops. And so what I'm observing with the folks that are doing no-till and cover crops here, they're relying on the competition from cover crops to help control some of the critical weeds. Now there's a few of them that they're still working on and trying to get at specific ones that are a major problem, but most of them are not, they don't have to have a real neat and clean field, but they do what they have to in terms of managing the cover crops to provide the competition and getting good benefits out of the cover crops rather than negative effects from the weeds. It's not easy, and there's some challenges there yet, and it will take some time because there are some risks. And when a farmer lives from one year to the next, he can't afford many major mistakes. And so it's a real challenge, but I think the emphasis needs to be looking towards how Mother Nature would do it. And if there's some way that we can mimic her, that would be the best route to take. Until we get to that point, we have to still use some herbicides for control, and I hope that we can work towards minimizing that, because it does a lot of damage, not only to the soil biology, but apparently there's some implications on human biology that we cannot tolerate. So I wish I could be more specific than that, but it's a difficult topic to talk about after 10,000 years of conventional agriculture.
We have also a question about the quality of carbon. Quality of carbon in CA compared to conventional tillage. What's your...
The quality of carbon. Okay. All carbon is good of some sort. And if you have a diamond, that's carbon, that's very valuable, and you want to maintain that. But carbon comes into the system as a wide range of properties, a wide range in characteristics. We can go from something like a simple sugar in solution that carbon is readily available and instantly available to any microbes in the soil. When you apply it to the soil, within minutes, you will see carbon dioxide coming off as a result of the microbes stimulated by that. You go through the spectrum of readily decomposable stuff that will happen in days. Then you go in some of the decomposition that's happened in months. And it's been demonstrated that the carbon that's captured in the previous crop, you lose 70% of that carbon the following year through natural decomposition processes. So that portion of it is very, very quick to decompose. But then you have a portion of it that just remains more calcitrant, and you go out to the extreme end in terms of the humic acids and the fulvic acids, where that carbon is really not available to anything. It doesn't provide energy to the microbes. It's just there and exists in the form of a very recalcitrant form of carbon. And we have this whole range from the readily available carbon to the stuff that's really not available. And for example, like in biochar, that results in a misunderstanding sometimes, but it's very dynamic, going from readily available to recalcitrant carbon in terms of plant growth. And that is, the chemistry becomes very, very difficult. And I don't like to get wrapped up in all the details because I don't understand all of the chemistry, but carbon is a good connector, connecting these other nutrients that are important to us in providing all these organic compounds that we need to carry out our everyday activities. And there's readily available carbon, and there's a carbon that's locked up and really sequestered. And we got everything in between, and our challenge as managers is to operate and manage the system to optimize what's going on as the carbon moves from this readily available form to the recalcitrant form as a humic acid.
Okay.
It's
Thank
complex.
you, Don. We are running out of time, so we will keep all the questions unanswered, but I think we've addressed most of the topics, at least that were addressed in the questions. So thank you very much, Don. I will give the floor to Joseph and Gottlieb so we can come to a close. Thank you very much again. Let me, last comment. We have created a YouTube channel, so all the presentations of these webinars will be available there. I will copy the link to the channel in the chat box now, but if you visit the ECAV website or the World Congress website, you will find also a link to the YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Yes, maybe it's me to say a few words, or is it you, Gottlieb?
Well, I'll start you, Joseph, first, then I'll finish. Wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very impressed. It was a very rich webinar, and I was also impressed about trying to follow the chat, that many friends and colleagues are listening and joining to this webinar, which is really reassuring. Don has presented beautiful slides, and I have learned a few things. The last comment I really liked, that carbon is a very good connector. I think Don is also a very good connector, and that's I think the important lesson, that we have to connect the biology, the soil biology, and the crops and the hardware and the farmers, the people, to the topic. And so I think we are on the right track. Also, I know from the field, specifically from Africa, it's hard to promote both, in a way, sustainable mechanization and development, and getting farmers out of subsistence into becoming entrepreneurs or small, let's say, market-oriented farmers, and not simply go commercial, but also at the same time think about the nature-based solutions and conservation agriculture farming. But I know we have, the network works, and we have programs ongoing, and we try to get better organized. And if there is one good outcome out of this miserable year, which is the COVID year. It's really that we can connect much more easily. We don't need a meeting invitation. We don't need a visa. We at least for the knowledge sharing, I think we have found the right platform to do this. And I think this will have to continue either to the physical event that is still planned for next summer, or if not, we do it like this. Okay. I mean, I think I stop here. So my role is also to thank FAO again, our team leader, Fan B, who couldn't join us today, our director, Shah. He is a new director. I mean, only 3 months in his current job, but he's already very impressed about what we do in conservation agriculture and sustainable mechanization and good agronomy. Then I want to also to thank Hafiz, who is the think tank behind many of our events and always keeping us on track. That's really good. And I also thank all the others that are in the call, in the meeting. I saw Theo Friedrich is in the meeting, and also Joyce from Africa, former colleagues who have retired. So I hope you're all well, and that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for these words. I also want to thank to all the panelists who participated, above all to Don, obviously. I want to thank also to all participants who found the time to share with us the presentation made by Don. It was, again, a very rich presentation, which we all know that he is capable to provide, and to convince ourselves that carbon is actually the key element in soils to bring about the benefits that soil and soil carbon and enriched through conservation agriculture can contribute. I still wanted to add also a question in the chat and answer question box, but as panelist, I'm not able to. I would still like to address a question to Don. One is, what would his answer be to the fellows who launched this news on in the magazine, the newspaper, New York Times, I think you said, who claimed that transforming 15% of our agricultural land into nature would have so many benefits. What would you respond to those while saying that, well, then where are you going to produce the food we all need? This is really a serious question. The ecologists are just thinking, well, then we import the food. They don't think, and especially here in Europe, we are all aware that the ecologist movement is so important and so much valued. But it's an issue that concerns me a lot. We as European also have to contribute to the food security worldwide, and we cannot just reduce our responsibility to produce food, and what we need we just import from elsewhere. So the issue is to the same is with the pesticides to be used. Well, of course, we all want to use less pesticides, and we know that pesticides are potentially harmful. But we cannot throw away all the findings, all the things we discovered over the centuries and over the last decades to improve agricultural performance. Of course, we have to be sure that pesticides are safe to use. That's no doubt about that. And we want to reduce any potential risk of pesticides. But we cannot actually just from one day to another abandon all what we found out that can help to make our agriculture competitive. And we don't want to go back to digging out the weeds by hand or whatever, you see. So we have to find this compromise. And as I think I mentioned it in the first webinar, sustainability is only the best compromise possible. We have to make compromises in order to be sustainable. Don, if you want to comment this at the end, I would appreciate.
Well, it's very interesting that you have mentioned all of my concerns to the same level of detail that I've experienced, and my observations are that we still don't have enough food production, and we still can't take away any of our land from food production based on what we are using now. There may be some time in the future. One of the problems in the US, we are accused of wasting about 35% of our food.
Sure.
We have to do something to save that. But the other thing that caught my eye is the writer of this story went on and interpreted some scientific results. And I've identified the author in asking those questions, but it showed her naivety in not understanding how food production is carried out and what's going on. So she wrote the story, and then it's her perception of what agriculture should be and why it could do these things based on her interpretation of the data that's at the bottom of the page. The source of that information is there, and I urge you to go look at that and read the science that they talk about. There's possibility that that could happen, but I want to make sure that all other forms of food production have been addressed before they try to take some good land out of production and set it up for nature. There's some aspect about this biological, I forgot the word now, biodiversity that's so important to us. It's a valuable resource. And if we have to keep and maintain that resource in a special piece of land, which we do for some medical products, then we may have to sacrifice that because of the importance of biodiversity in our production systems. And I don't know how we maintain that. People are talking about now in terms of planting pollinator crops in the fence rows, in the road ditches, so that we don't have to worry about them in the field production. And this is one way to maintain the biodiversity in close proximity to the agricultural thing so that the bees can pollinate them. But I agree with you 100%, and I'm not sure how to respond to that question any more than I have. I want to look at what the scientists have said in that publication and see if I can understand that, and then try to develop some dialogue with them to see if I really understand what they're trying to do. It was very, very frustrating to me, and I'm glad to see that you were awake to pick up on that frustration on how we might avoid using some of our best resources for food production. Thanks for staying awake during that part of it.
Well, and to me, why should we put land apart to sequester carbon and preserve biodiversity if we can do it simultaneously while producing food?
Well, that's where I have optimism about conservation agriculture systems. It can do that as well as any system that I'm aware of, and we just need to learn to do it and apply it with the right science foundation. As long as we do that, we'll have a chance. And then hope that some other young person will come along with a better idea, a better way of doing it. We got to continue to make progress, or else we're going to go up and drop over the cliff. So I appreciate you bringing that point up.
Okay, thanks a lot, Don. Thanks to all of you for participating, the FAO for co-chairing this session as well, and for supporting this series of webinars. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the next webinar in 2 weeks.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye to all, and thanks. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you, Don. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Emilio,
Thanks. My honor.
Gottlieb.
Bye.
Stay in
Bye.
touch.
Bye.